So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an interesting talk. I hope it would be. It's an historical subject, but with philosophical dimensions. It might be of interest for any modern European with a certain level of spiritual and political maturity. It concerns and preoccupies us Greeks nowadays, as well as other Europeans who have gone through similar problems and historical phases. The title is Solidarity Through Socio-Political Analysis, the issue 57 of the German journal Das Argument on Modern Greece and the Military Dictatorship. First of all, let's have a look at the cover, current cover of this journal. Today you see an issue dedicated to contemporary issues, such as ecological ones. First of all, one should know that the scientific journal Das Argument, which nowadays belongs to the internationally acknowledged German periodicals, and more or less has been established as a component part of German academic life, and has not ceased to play an active part in the German and international socio-political discourse, emerged in 1959 in West Berlin as a means to publicize the resistance of the students of that time against the remilitarization and the nuclear armaments of the Federal Republic of West Germany. This is the cover of the issue in question, number 57, issued in the year 1970. The general title is Revolution and Counter-Revolution in Greece. You see already the table of contents on the cover, but you see it also here, the third page. Let's talk about who were the main contributors to this special issue, number 57. First of all, Walter Fischer, the historian, had also wrote about historical issues in the same journal some years later, but further details of him could not unfortunately be retrieved. Another important name is of Eberhard Rondholz. Eberhard Rondholz was born in 1938. He's still active, a historian, a journalist, and a writer. He has written and broadcasted much about modern Greece, and tended to call him a contemporary Philhellene. Marius Nikolinatos is an economist. He was a lecturer at the Freie Universität Berlin. He has written many books about economy, and he was also active as a politician in the years to come in Greece. Carlos Papoulias, born 1929. He was a jurist. He studied law. He had obtained his PhD at the University of Cologne and has spent many years in West Germany, the years of the dictatorship, and later on he became, in the democratic Greece, the government's under Andreas Papandreou, foreign minister and president of the Hellenic Republic between 2005 and 2015. Also, other minor contributors. You see the whole picture. We have to do with people who were scientists, scientific activities, but also political activities. The main claim of the historical analysis can be so summarized. It's not a dictatorship of some colonels who act arbitrarily on their own. It is a form of government that serves in the best way the interests of the ruling class in general, or of its hegemonic parts, under the particular circumstances of the specific time. An all-round and well-documented historical retrospective serves the aim of sustaining and substantiating this claim. General overview of the preceding first half of the 20th century. Since the 1920s, a partly latent and partly open civil war is still going on and has been predominant in Greece. You see also in quotation marks the German original, for those who can read and understand German and speak, of course. I skip it for the sake of time management. One should pay attention to some nuances. The meaning. So, for instance, the meaning of the verb herrschen in German, that on the one hand describes situations, statements about being, use this verb, but on the other hand describes and denotes political relationships of power. In the sense, what's going on, the civil war, is also revealing a predominant issue in modern Greece. This whole situation is explained by resorting to the general term of the situation of the classes and the relations between them, Klassenlage in German. This situation is distinguished by Ungleichheit und Ungerechtigkeit, inequality and injustice. Almost 2/3 of the population live in rural areas, but because of the backwardness of agriculture, especially in the vast mountain areas, they can often hardly make a living. The small industrial proletariat, basically limited to Athens and Salonika, still lives today under conditions comparable to those of the English workers in the mid-19th century. The upper bourgeoisie, the ruling class, is tiny. Only 200 families make up the most important industrialists, ship owners, officers, and civil servants. The detailed analysis of Nikolakos on page 164 following argues that in Greece there is almost no industry really deserving this name. There is only an economic sector that's on the way to industrialization. A unitary history of oppression, exploitation, foreign dependence on the will of major powers, foreign interventions, and socio-economical backwardness. That's what was happening in Greece, according to the authors. The roots of the situation in the 20th century can be traced back even into the long period of occupation by the Ottoman Empire and the collaboration of the landowners, the occupants, with the Turks. This is once again the German original and our translation. It's about the unfavorable conditions that determined the early stages of the independent Greek state. In the 19th century, Greece could not keep up with the rest of Europe. There was no liberal bourgeoisie that could have opposed the idea of social democracy to the absolute monarchy, feudalism, the bureaucracy, and the rulers of the church. There was no proletariat which, in coalition with the rural population and the petty bourgeoisie, could have taken on the leadership of the struggle against absolutism and for the distribution of property and participation in state power. The utter and tangible expression of the Greek backwardness was the bankruptcy of 1893, the shameful defeat of 1897, and the ensuing period of foreign economic oppression through the International Control Commission. In the interwar era, the era between the two world wars, two different sectors of the Greek bourgeoisie were shaped, one consisting of wealth merchants, the other one of former landowners who were generously compensated by the Greek state for unavoidable and unfavorable for them expropriations. After the initial disorder due to the painful military defeat in Asia Minor, the subsequent influx of refugees with the arranged mutual exchange of parts of the population between Greece and Turkey, the two sectors of the bourgeoisie achieved a tacit unity against the poor peasants, the rising industrial proletariat, and their mostly leftist political expressions. This tacit social alliance was of great importance, but it was not forever stable. So later on, the old oligarchy, according to Nikolakos, succeeded in gaining political power, especially through the Metaxas dictatorship in 1936. So again, German paragraph about the ongoing civil war in the first half of the 20th century. That's the meaning. The bourgeoisie could only prevent the socialist revolution by the toughest means. In 1936, it succeeded in securing its position through a military dictatorship without any foreign help. From 1942 to 1949, that is during the German occupation, and in the first years after the war, the civil war was waged openly. Without the intervention of England and the USA on the part of the bourgeoisie, while they wanted to have Greece at their disposal as a military base against the USSR, and for the sake of their own interests in the Middle East, the ruling class would have lost. There are several important documents included in this issue. This makes the strength and value of this analysis. So the New York Times wrote in 1947, on the 5th of March. This is the German translation of this excerpt. And our written translation today, because it's not easy, of course, to retrieve the old original, English American original. The United States' interest for Greece is not just sentimentalism. Greece dominates the strategic constellation of the Eastern Mediterranean. If Greece were to become communist, Turkey would be politically encircled on the flank and could no longer withstand the pressure that is already annoying. Without Turkey, Iran would perish. The United States has a strong interest in the Middle East because Saudi Arabia is in that area, and there is likely more oil in Saudi Arabia than in the known United States deposits. And this was just the beginning, or in our perspective, an intermediate stage in a long row of foreign interventions. These interventions, we're talking about the end of the openly declared civil war stricto sensu, so say between 1946 and 1949, and the direct or indirect interventions were to become normality in Greece in the following years. These interventions were decisive for the development of the country. Formally a sovereign democratic state, actually in English, and since 1947 American semi-colony. The bourgeoisie kept the working classes under control through the military forces, police, concentration camps, and election fraud. It succeeded in largely suppressing the opposition. It did not succeed in eliminating the causes of the latent uprising. Economic and social contradictions intensified further. When the right was faced with a complete defeat in the 1967 elections, it again made use of the means of the military coup with American support. This is another document. It was a statement of General Papagos in April 1952. General Papagos was an important military figure, and just only some months after he released the statement, became Prime Minister in Greece. We see now the attitude of Greek politicians towards the foreign, especially the American interventions. When we exist, not only thanks to our own decision, we refers to the modern liberal and bourgeois Greek state. It exists not only thanks to our own decision, but because the Americans exist, and they report to their citizens. Under what type of logic can we deny them the right to have their own opinion? American aid is given for a specific purpose. As a consequence, when its purpose is misunderstood, we cannot claim its continuation. When, for example, the fighting strength of the army wavers or internal security is jeopardized, what must the Americans do? Congratulate us? Okay? More generally, this business of oversensitivity is not of place nowadays. And similar statements were publicized by American officials. Most famous or notorious of them was the ambassador in those days, Purifoy. He openly expressed his preference for a certain type of electoral system that could serve the American interests. We have now the certain kind of reactions to this interference. Margaret Papandreou, the wife of Andreas Papandreou, American woman with some connections in the American political establishment. She wrote a letter to prominent American women, among them to the wife of the president, July 1965. And she discloses what was going on with these interventions. For years now, under the Karamanlis regime, and through this one, the Americans have associated themselves here with the right, and particularly with the military. There are three groups of Americans in Greece: the embassy, the CIA, the mission, the American aid mission. The latter two, but particularly the CIA, have the upper hand here in terms of American policy. Ambassador Briggs has reported on this situation in a Senate hearing and declared that there is often no communication or collaboration between the CIA group and the embassy. Then we have the dictatorship in 1967. And the key question is why? Why did the Americans decide to support the so-called little junta of the colonials instead of the big one? There was also another junta, close circle of military officers determined to overthrow the constitution. There was the junta of the general, directed under the auspices of King Constantine. But this junta did not succeed in seizing power. It was the other one, the little one. The Americans opted for this one, and they took the king by surprise, in a sense. It is well possible that they considered Constantine untrustworthy after he succeeded in overthrowing the government of Georgios Papandreou in 1965, but he failed to bring the whole political life of Greece under control. The Americans at that time had major fears about the stability of Greece. They feared an invasion by a communist country, or at least some military tension with communist countries of the communist bloc, and wanted to prevent any inner subversive activity. Similar plans were also prepared for other Western European countries. by the United States in collaboration with local politicians. Such countries are, for those who are interested, for instance, Italy or Norway. This is the viewpoint of the authors, but we have to pose a critical question. We have to philosophize about it. We have to ask ourselves if and to what extent this analysis as a whole depicts the truth. The whole historical reconstruction is consistently presented and evidence-based. The problem may lie in the determining role attributed to class struggles and the level of economic development. One may observe and object that the whole historical approach is centered on the dynamic of the development that is traditionally the main virtue of a Marxist or leftist standpoint, but just in stressing this dynamic, it tends in a certain sense to prove one-dimensional. We see that despite or through constant changes, in the long run, a certain stability comes to the foreground, beyond the dynamic of class struggles. So if the class struggles perpetuate, what happens? What is the outcome? This is another kind of stability. If the dynamic or dynamic processes tends to repeat itself. But apart from these problems, it's important that the necessity for an adequate understanding is stressed by the authors. According to them, of particular importance is the differentiation from any theory that considers the term fascism, totalitarianism, and dictatorship in an undifferentiated and diffuse manner. The authors reject also any theory that ascribes fascism a leading role in expressing the interests of the petty bourgeoisie or the spirit of resistance against the financial capital. In reality, fascism is a political force serving the interests of the financial capital and opposing other parts of the bourgeoisie. The specific difference of Greece is that the financial capital there, as a mighty factor interested in manipulating Greek politics, was not only of native but also of American origin. The direct consequence of this is that we have to do throughout this period with antagonisms within the bourgeoisie. If we treat once again the whole analysis philosophically, we have to determine its explanatory value. It's true that certain facts that happened in the decisive period between 1967 and 1970 were explained and could by this pattern be explained. There were events that could be seen as a direct testimony of the inner bourgeois antagonisms. In December 1967, there was the counter-coup by the king and the big junta, so-called big great junta, the generals. There were also some minor military revolts by royalist officers in January 1968 and May 1969. While this happened, the Americans showed once again their support for Papadopoulos and his junta regime. They informed him about the movements, opponents, the intentions of the king, who was meanwhile self-exiled in Italy. Many high-rank civil servants, judges and professors, that is, people without any connection to left-wing politics, were dismissed. The junta wanted to get rid of them. That's what's the meaning of it. They had a strong interest in opposing other parts of the ruling class, let's say. There were certain occasions publicly declared expressions of publicly declared support of the junta by the United States. The US officials did not become tired to stress the necessity of the coup, the trustworthiness of the colonels, and the strategic importance of Greeks for the NATO. On the other hand, we have to point out some seeming antinomies of the official US policy. The Americans, especially some years after the beginning of the junta, the military regime, started to talk about the aim of the democratization of the country. They did it presumably for two main reasons, although on the other hand they supported openly the junta. One may suppose, justifiably suppose, that they succumbed to pressure from abroad, from certain democratic countries, mainly democracies in Europe, Scandinavian countries, the front line. It may also that Americans had the impression that the colonies had already fulfilled their mission to prevent a centrist government and to silence the opposition. And that means the next stage should be repaired. The next stage could take on the form of a bourgeois government, a new right-wing coalition under Karamanlis, who could guarantee the stability at the end of the 60s or the beginning of the 70s. But after the colonies had fulfilled their mission. There were also, and this was known to Americans, internal socio-political antagonisms, not just within the right, the broad sense, but within the far right. There were certain hardliners and coordinated by two well-known generals and factors of the regime, Ioannis Ladas and Dimitrios Ioannidis. These hardliners would later seize power in 1973. They had already formed a distinctively independently acting group within the supporters of the junta regime. The Americans had eye open towards them, so to say. But This is the explanatory value of the whole analysis. If we are to judge it philosophically, we must also take its practical dimension into account. We must bring it to relation to the political stance resulting from it. Far from a moralist denouncement of the dictatorship, this special issue, argument 57, favors a more balanced view that connects the rational approach with the political task. The desired and only possible form of resistance, strong resistance, deserving this name, comes, and the authors are right at this point, from the left-wing groups near the democratic left, the party EDA in Greece, Communist Party, the legal Communist Party, and the part of it who was opposed to Soviet predominance, so-called Communist Party of the Interior. These were the particular sectors of the left. And to it belonged also the adherents of Andreas Papandreou, who had founded abroad in Sweden the Pan-Hellenic Liberation Movement, PAC. The authors see positively all these splintered expressions of the left, but they are, on the other hand, realistic to say that all these formations suffer from internal disagreements and disputes, especially the communist left. The split between the Communist Party that retains the flags and titles, the pro-Soviet party and the Euro-Communist one had happened in 1968. The conclusion is quite simple. The future will show if the resistance movement can build a strong united front to overthrow the fascist regime. But what was all this for? We must determine the result, the whole approach and its impact. It was first of all important that a brief and nevertheless quite accurate reconstruction of modern Greek history was disseminated, was spread abroad through this issue in 1970. It's also important that this well-founded presentation was justified through the need to study and adequately explain the whole unfolding developments of that time. The practical message was indirectly sent to all resistance groups, message to unite, to unify their activities and so come to coordinated and effective action. This message was crucial, although it could not probably immediately trigger nothing but some further discussions among political intellectuals, and although the practical goal attached to it in the long run proved to be unrealistic, at least in the sense that this goal, the unity of the resistance groups, was surpassed by the more effective action of the reactionary and imperialistic forces, at least conservative forces, which finally succeeded in imposing a peaceful transition that retained certain negative aspects of the fascist past. This was issue of polemics in the first years of metapolitics, the restitution of democracy in Greece. The leftists doubted if democracy as such was restored. They pointed out that certain elements of military regime had continued to play an active role in public life. This was in part the case for those who have lived this period. It could not be regarded as a central issue in Greece in the years which followed after the restoration of democracy, but this heavy heritage and black heritage, the fascist past, occupies still a prominent place in Greece's public life. Today is the 8th of October 2020. These days, whole Greece and beyond it, many democratically oriented citizens in Europe are concerned with the trial, the Golden Dawn trial, the trial against the officials of the neo-Nazi party who are convicted of certain crimes in the penal law. That means this issue is not over. I mean, we have to come to terms with our history, the negative aspects of it, and so to achieve a new level of consciousness adapted to today's problems and challenges. So, I want to express my thanks for your attendance and attention. I hope you have learned some things about Greece, some things about recent history, and also some things about the way philosophers look at history. Thanks a lot once again, and we're looking forward to further activities within the very modern and very important network of European universities. Thank you very much, and see you again.